I want to go back a few years further than the Eisenhower years, though. I'd like to go back to the year of the first golf tournament at the Augusta National, 1934.
That's right.
It wasn't even called the Masters the first year, was it?
No. The reason for that was that we had debated about what to call the tournament, and I made the proposal that it be called the Masters, which Bob Jones promptly vetoed because he thought it was a little too presumptuous.
Mm-hmm.
And he insisted that it be called the Augusta National Invitational Tournament.
Augusta National is the most beautiful golf course on earth. Every spring, the Masters tournament looks like something from a dream. The grass is impossibly green. The bunkers shine bright white. The azaleas bloom perfectly on cue. The quiet atmosphere makes it feel like the rest of the world has disappeared. That is exactly what Augusta National wants you to see. But that perfect image is not the whole truth. Behind the beauty and tradition sits one of the most controlled, secretive, and powerful institutions in sports history. The same club that gives us the green jacket and the famous champions has spent decades hiding its darker history. If you enjoy stories that dig beneath the perfect image, use the hype feature and give this video some hype, because Augusta's story is about to look very different. This is the story of a golf club that did not just host a tournament, it built a fortress. It built a fortress around race, around language, around membership, and around the very ground the course sits on. The dark secrets Augusta National has been hiding for decades are finally coming to light. The public image of Augusta is one of pure Southern charm and sporting excellence. But that charm was constructed with care. It was built to hide uncomfortable truths. The Masters feels like it has always been there. It has not. Augusta National Golf Club was founded in 1932. It sits on a huge piece of land in Augusta, Georgia. The property covers 365 acres. Before the club existed, the land was called Fruitland Nurseries. It operated as an indigo and plant nursery, but that history has a darker side. The property's roots reach back to the antebellum South. That was a time when slave labor supported the local economy. The nursery business depended on enslaved people. That is the soil on which Augusta National was built. The club was created by two very different men. The first was Bobby Jones. He was a famous amateur golfer. He was the romantic face of the project. People loved him. He represented everything good and pure about the game. He was the hero. The other man was Clifford Roberts. Roberts was a Wall Street investment banker. He had no interest in romance. He was interested in control. Roberts took over as the club's administrator in 1931. He remained in power until 1976. That is nearly half a century of control over one institution. He was the architect of the system. In 1934, Roberts created the Masters tournament. He did not just want a golf competition. He wanted an annual stage. He wanted to project a very specific image. That image was one of aristocratic Southern gentility. He wanted the world to see elegance, tradition, and order. But the stage was not open to everyone. From the very beginning, Roberts built a system that enforced strict racial and social hierarchies. He understood that image was everything. If the tournament looked perfect, people would not ask questions about who was excluded. Clifford Roberts was honest about his beliefs. He did not hide them in private memos. He did not speak in code. He stated his institutional philosophy out loud for anyone to hear. The research contains his exact words. He said, "As long as I'm alive, all the golfers will be white."
My suggestion, Bob had told him, and he says, "I think you're making a mistake in not calling it the Masters."
And all the caddies will be black. That quotation is the key to understanding everything Augusta did for decades. It was not just an opinion, it was official policy. It was the law of the land inside the gates. The club codified a racial labor model. It mirrored the Jim Crow laws that governed the Deep South at that time. Under this system, black golfers were totally excluded from the Masters tournament. They could not compete, they could not qualify, they could not even receive an invitation. At the same time, the club required the mandatory employment of an all-black caddy corps. This was not a coincidence. It was a dual mechanism of racial control. White men played the game, black men carried the bags. The system was rigid and unapologetic. For the first 48 editions of the Masters, touring professionals were not allowed to use their usual caddies. That rule seems strange today, but it was designed to keep the local system in place. Every player who arrived at Augusta had to hire a member of the club's caddy corps. Those men knew the course better than anyone, and they had to know it. The terrain at Augusta National is famously difficult. The slopes are severe. The grain of the grass is deceptive. Without local knowledge, a player could lose the tournament on a single bad break. The caddies possessed encyclopedic understanding of every inch of the property. They had walked those fairways thousands of times. They had watched every bounce and roll. They knew where the ball would go before the player even hit it. Some of these men became legends in their own right, even if the club never acknowledged them properly. Willie "Pappy" Stokes was one of the most important figures in Masters history. He was born on the property. He helped construct the original course, and he caddied for 5 different champions. That means his knowledge directly contributed to 5 Masters victories. He knew the greens better than the men who putted on them. Nathaniel "Ironman" Avery was another giant. He caddied for Arnold Palmer. He was on the bag during all 4 of Palmer's Masters wins. That is not a small detail. Palmer was one of the biggest stars in golf history. His success at Augusta was built partly on Avery's expertise. Every read of a putt, every club selection, every strategic decision was shaped by what Avery knew. Carl Jackson was another indispensable figure. He caddied in 54 Masters tournaments. He worked with Ben Crenshaw and anchored Crenshaw's victories in 1984 and 1995. These men knew the course better than the champions they helped. They had spent their lives studying those slopes. They knew how the ball would roll. They knew where the danger was. Despite their incredible skill, they were subjected to strict social stratification. The research describes the conditions clearly. They were required to wear standard white boiler suits. Those uniforms evoked domestic servitude. They made the men look like servants from an earlier era. The caddies were also denied access to basic clubhouse facilities. They could not eat where the players ate. They could not rest where the players rested. They existed on the property but were kept separate. The golf world celebrated the champions. The caddies who made those victories possible remained invisible, and that inequality lasted for generations. The champions received trophies and fame. The caddies received wages and nothing more. No plaques, no pensions, no recognition. The competition itself was also segregated. Black golfers were systematically excluded from competing. Clifford Roberts justified this by hiding behind the meritocratic idea of invitations. He claimed the Masters only invited players who had earned their spot. He declared that making special accommodations for black players would constitute what he called discrimination in reverse. That argument allowed him to maintain the color barrier while pretending he was being fair. It was a clever rhetorical trick. He made it sound like equality was on his side. The truth was very different. Accomplished black professionals were kept out for decades. Charlie Sifford was one of the best players of his generation. He won PGA Tour events. He broke barriers elsewhere. But he was never invited to the Masters during the 1960s. Pete Brown was another champion. He also won on the PGA Tour. He also received no invitation. These were not average players. They were elite competitors. They had proven themselves against the best in the world, but they were not welcome at Augusta. The color barrier on the course was not broken until 1975. That was when Lee Elder finally qualified. He won the 1974 Monsanto Open. That victory gave him automatic entry into the Masters. His appearance in 1975 broke a 41-year competitive color barrier. 41 years. Think about that number. From 1934 to 1975, the Masters tournament was a whites-only competition. Elder's entry came under immense public and political pressure. The world was changing. The civil rights movement had forced many institutions to integrate. Augusta held out as long as it could. They did not want to change. They were forced to change. Elder's participation was a milestone, but it did not mean the club had reformed. It meant the club had been pushed into a corner. The club's internal membership was even slower to change. The roster of members remained exclusively white until late 1990. That is astonishing. The Masters had black competitors in 1975, but the club itself did not admit a black member until 15 years later. What finally forced the change? The answer is public pressure. In 1990, the Shoal Creek Golf and Country Club in Alabama became a national controversy. The founder of that club openly refused to admit black members. Civil rights protests erupted at the PGA Championship held there. Corporate sponsors threatened to pull their support. The backlash was enormous. Augusta National saw what was happening. They did not want the same treatment, so they acted preemptively. In late 1990, they extended an invitation to Ron Townsend. Townsend was a television executive. He became the first black member of Augusta National. But notice how the change happened. It did not come from internal reflection. It did not come from a moral awakening. It came from fear of corporate sponsor flight. It came from fear of national backlash. The club did not lead on this issue. They were dragged into it. They only acted when their financial interests were threatened. The pattern is clear. Augusta National does not change because it wants to. It changes because it has no other choice. Progress only arrives when the cost of resistance becomes too high. Then came the caddy system. For decades, the mandatory local caddy rule had forced players to hire from the black caddy corps. But in 1983, Augusta abruptly abolished that regulation. Touring professionals were finally allowed to use their regular caddies. On the surface, this seemed like progress. The racial labor system was ending, but there was a tragic consequence. The veteran black caddies were displaced almost overnight. They had spent their entire lives learning Augusta National. They had guided champions. They had helped build the tournament's legend, and when the rule changed, they were simply pushed aside. The research states that many lost their primary economic livelihood. They received no pensions. They received no formal historical recognition. The club that had depended on their knowledge for decades offered them nothing in return. That is the pattern. Augusta National used black labor whenever it was convenient. And when that labor was no longer required, the workers were forgotten. This is not just history. This is a case study in institutional exploitation. The men who built the Masters were cast aside. Their names are not on any plaques. Their stories are not told in the official history. They were essential, and then they were invisible. The club moved on without them. The players moved on without them. The world forgot about them, but they were there. They were part of every great moment. They helped make the champions, and they received nothing in return. Augusta's control did not stop with who could play and who could work there. It also extended to the television broadcast. The club exercises a shocking amount of power over how the Masters appears on screen. Most sports leagues sign long-term television contracts. They lock in deals for years at a time. Augusta does something different. They negotiate rolling one-year agreements with CBS and ESPN. That means the contract is renewed every single year. That gives the club enormous leverage. If the network does something Augusta does not like, the club can simply refuse to renew. That threat ensures absolute compliance. Broadcasters know they have to follow the rules. And the rules are not just about cameras. They are about language. Augusta has a rigid lexicon that broadcasters must obey. The research lists some of these rules. Spectators cannot be called spectators. They must be called patrons. The back nine cannot be called the back nine. It is the second nine. The rough is the second cut. The practice range is the tournament practice area. These are not suggestions. They are requirements. If a broadcaster uses the wrong word, there are consequences. This is not normal. Most sports events do not care if you call the crowd a crowd. Augusta cares. They care deeply. They want the language to match the image. They want everything to sound elegant and controlled. Every word that comes out of a broadcaster's mouth is monitored. If it does not fit the Augusta script, the broadcaster is gone. The research contains several famous examples of punishment. In 1966, CBS anchor Jack Whitaker was covering the tournament. During a playoff, he looked at the crowd around the 18th green and called it a mob scene. That was a normal word. It was not offensive. It was just a description. But Clifford Roberts took immediate offense. He demanded Whitaker's removal. He said, "We don't have mobs at Augusta." Whitaker was banned from Masters telecasts for 6 years. He did not return until 1972. One word cost him nearly a decade of work. That is the level of control Augusta exerts. A broadcaster used a common word. He was exiled. In 1994, CBS analyst Gary McCord made comments during the broadcast. He joked that the greens looked bikini-waxed. He also said that shots rolling over the green ended up in body bags. These were humorous remarks. They were not mean-spirited, but Augusta did not find them funny. Two-time champion Tom Watson complained in writing. Watson sent his complaint to the producer and the club chairman. The club responded immediately. McCord was permanently removed from Masters broadcasts. He never worked the tournament again. His career covering the Masters was over forever. Kenny Mayne was another example. During the 2000s, Mayne was a broadcaster for ESPN. He made humorous comments about bringing saucy ladies to the course. Augusta revoked his Masters credentials permanently. One joke about women cost him his access forever. He could never cover the tournament again. The message was clear. If you break the rules, you are gone. No second chances. No appeals. Just permanent exile. That is how Augusta maintains its image. They silence anyone who might disrupt the carefully constructed atmosphere. The control even extends to the sounds you hear. In the early 2000s, something strange happened. Ornithologists started watching the Masters broadcasts. They noticed something odd. They identified the distinct calls of the European chaffinch. That is a bird species that is not native to the area around Augusta. The birds were not there, but their calls were on the broadcast. The research states that network technicians had been layering the audio feed with pre-recorded bird sounds. They used loops of non-native bird audio. Why would they do that? The answer is simple. The artificial bird sounds helped mask crowd chatter. They helped cover mechanical murmurs. They hid the noise of coarse machinery. The result was an acoustic illusion of undisturbed nature. The broadcast sounded peaceful and calm. That peacefulness was manufactured. Augusta was controlling not just what viewers saw, but also what they heard. This is not a small detail. It shows how deeply the club thinks about its image. Every single element of the television presentation is managed. Nothing is left to chance. If the natural sounds are not quiet enough, they add fake bird sounds. It is the ultimate form of editorial control. They are manufacturing reality for the viewers at home. The birds were not real. The silence was not real. The whole soundscape was engineered to make the course feel like a sanctuary. That is how far Augusta goes to protect its image. The same control applied to women. For 8 decades, Augusta National prohibited women from membership. That is a long time. The club was founded in 1932. Women were not admitted as members until 2012. That is 80 years of exclusion. It is important to understand the exact nature of the exclusion. Female guests were allowed to play the course. They could walk the grounds, but they were denied membership status. They could not vote on club matters. They could not access private clubhouse spaces. They were second-class visitors in an institution that controlled one of the biggest events in sports. The controversy exploded in June of 2002. Dr. Martha Burke was the chair of the National Council of Women's Organizations. She sent a private letter to the club chairman. His name was William Johnson. Everyone called him Hootie. She urged the club to admit female members. Johnson did not respond quietly. He rejected the inquiry and launched a public campaign. He issued a combative 4-page press release. He declared that Augusta would not be coerced into altering its constitution at the point of a bayonet. That phrase was intentionally aggressive. He was signaling that the club would not give in to pressure. Corporate sponsors faced public boycott campaigns. But Johnson had a plan. He showed the club's financial insulation. He unilaterally released all primary television sponsors from their contracts. That included huge companies like IBM, Citigroup, and Coca-Cola. They were free to leave, and the club did not care. Augusta National absorbed tens of millions of dollars in production and transmission costs. They broadcast the 2003 and 2004 Masters tournaments entirely free of commercial interruption. Think about that for a moment. A major sporting event aired on network television with no ads. The club funded the broadcast through its own private reserves and its merchandise operations. They did not need corporate money. They demonstrated that their corporate independence made them immune to economic pressure. If sponsors would not stay, they could go. Augusta would carry on. The exclusionary policy finally ended in August of 2012. Chairman Billy Payne announced the admission of Condoleezza Rice and Darla Moore. Rice was a former Secretary of State. Moore was a South Carolina financier. They became the first 2 female members in club history. But the change did not come from internal reform. It came after a decade of public controversy. It came after the club had fought hard to keep women out. It was not a moment of moral awakening. It was a moment of calculated adjustment. The club resisted for as long as possible. Then it made the change when the pressure became too intense. The admission of Rice and Moore was a significant moment, but it did not erase the 80 years of exclusion. It did not undo the damage. It was a step forward, but it was a step that should have been taken decades earlier. The course itself is not as natural as it looks. Everything about Augusta National's presentation during tournament week is carefully engineered. The natural conditions of eastern Georgia in early spring are not cooperative. The weather can be unpredictable. The grass can be difficult to maintain. But Augusta does not simply accept nature. They override it. They use mechanical and chemical technologies. In 1994, course superintendent Marsh Benson did something remarkable. He patented the sub-air system. That system was installed beneath all the pudding surfaces. It is an underground network of hydronic conduits and pneumatic pumps. The system operates in 2 modes. In high moisture conditions, it generates high-volume vacuum suction. That suction pulls standing rainwater through the soil. The water goes into subsurface drainage lines. The process takes minutes. That is how Augusta keeps greens fast during rain. The system also circulates conditioned air directly into the root zones of the bent grass. That prevents summer heat stress. It also mitigates spring frost. The grass is protected from extreme temperatures. It stays perfectly green and healthy. That is not natural. That is industrial horticulture. They are not letting nature take its course. They are bending nature to their will. The grass is not naturally perfect. It is made perfect through technology. The sub-air system is a marvel of engineering, but it is also a reminder that Augusta does not trust the natural world. They have to control everything. The bunkers are also manufactured. They are filled with spruce pine quartz. The material is also called SP55. It is a pure granulated feldspar and quartz byproduct. It is mined in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. The bright white color provides extreme reflectivity for cameras. It also offers consistent compaction. Every bunker looks perfect on television. The water hazards are treated as well. Rays Creek and the ponds on holes 11, 15, and 16 are dyed. The club uses industrial dyes and algicides. These chemicals mask natural silt. They suppress biological growth. They enhance color contrast for the cameras. The water looks blue and clear. That is not natural. That is chemical engineering. Even the course design has been altered. Alistair Mackenzie designed the original course in 1932. He emphasized a ground game strategic routing. The course played along the ground, but over decades, architects changed it. Perry Maxwell worked on it, Robert Trent Jones Sr. worked on it, Tom Fazio worked on it. They altered the design to favor a different style of play. They made the course more aerial. They made it more penal. The tournament setup became more challenging and more dramatic. That is how Augusta National remains the hardest and most beautiful course on television. It is not natural. It is a masterpiece of control. Everything you see has been designed and manufactured. The grass, the sand, the water, the layout, all of it is controlled. The club has spent millions to make sure the course looks perfect on television. That is their priority. The viewer experience is more important than the natural environment. The physical size of Augusta National has also grown. The club has been buying land aggressively. The research states that they have spent more than $280 million. They have purchased surrounding residential subdivisions. They have bought commercial properties. They have bought shopping centers along Washington Road and Berkman's Road. All of this land was purchased so the club could expand. Acquired parcels are demolished. They build perimeter buffers. They build patron facilities. They build hospitality developments like Berkman's Place. But there was resistance. The most prominent example involved Herman and Elizabeth Thacker. They owned a house at 1112 Stanley Road. The club desperately wanted that property. They offered multi-million-dollar buyout offers. The Thackers refused. They did not want to leave their home. The house had been built in 1956. They stayed even as the club surrounded them. They remained an isolated private enclave. They were completely encircled by Augusta National's development. The Thackers held out until their deaths. Their refusal is a remarkable act of defiance. The club buys everything around them. They bought everything but that one property. Below ground, the expansion continued. In 2020, Augusta completed an extensive subterranean logistics tunnel. It runs beneath Washington Road. The tunnel links course infrastructure to the newly constructed Global Broadcast Village. It is designed to conceal supply transport, utility lines, and tournament operations from view. Even the movement of supplies must be hidden. Nothing is left to public observation. The tunnel is a symbol of the club's obsession with secrecy. They do not want anyone to see how the tournament operates behind the scenes. Everything must be hidden. The green jacket is one of the most famous symbols in sports, but it is also a weapon. The club uses aggressive legal action to protect it. The green jacket was introduced in 1937. It helped identify club members to patrons. Since 1949, the jacket has been awarded to Masters champions, but the club asserts strict proprietary ownership over every jacket produced. The research explains the rule clearly. The garments are treated as permanent institutional property. They are not considered private personal awards. Reigning Masters champions are allowed to take their jacket off the grounds. They can possess it for 12 months following their victory. But once that year is over, the jacket must be returned. It goes back to the clubhouse storage vault. It can only be worn on the premises during tournament week. Members are barred from removing their jackets from club property entirely. That means the club owns every jacket, not the champions who wore them. But sometimes vintage jackets appear on the secondary market. They come up for auction. When that happens, Augusta National does not ask politely. They sue. The research details several examples. In 2013, they initiated legal action to recover the 1959 jacket belonging to Art Wall. The jacket had been consigned to heritage auctions. Augusta claimed it was stolen property. The auction was halted. The jacket was returned to club custody. In 2017, the club filed a federal lawsuit. The case was called Augusta National Incorporated versus Green Jacket Auctions Incorporated. They filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Georgia. They wanted to stop the auction of Byron Nelson's 1966 jacket. They also went after member jackets belonging to George King and John R. Butler Jr. The club argued that because it does not sell or gift title to green jackets, any garment outside its physical custody is legally stolen property. The court granted a temporary injunction. The auction was blocked. The club got its jackets back. The research notes that some jackets have been sold. The 1934 and 1936 jacket of inaugural winner Horton Smith surfaced at auction in 2013. That was an early vintage piece. It sold before the club could intervene. It fetched $682,000. That is a huge sum, but the club has learned from that experience. They now act aggressively. They use trademark infringement claims. They use brand dilution arguments. They use common law trover. Trover is an old legal term that means the unlawful retention of stolen property. The club treats every jacket outside its vault as stolen. That gives them powerful legal standing. They can use court injunctions to repossess their apparel. This is not just about cloth and thread. It is about total control over the symbol. No one should be able to profit from a green jacket without the club's permission. Even the champion who earned it cannot keep it forever. The jacket is not a gift. It is a loan. The club wants you to know that they own everything. They own the jacket, they own the symbol, they own the tournament, they own the brand. And they will use the legal system to protect that ownership. The perfect security posture Augusta presents is not always perfect. The club has experienced serious security breaches. The research documents one of the most dramatic events in club history. On October 22, 1983, Augusta National faced a severe crisis. President Ronald Reagan was playing the course. He was there as a guest of Secretary of State George Shultz. He was accompanied by White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan and Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady. The presidential party was on the 16th green. That is when a man named Charles Harris arrived. Harris was 45 years old. He was an unemployed local resident. He was experiencing severe personal distress. He drove a Dodge pickup truck through the locked Gate 3 on Washington Road. He tore the barrier from its hinges. He was inside the property. He entered the pro shop. He was armed with a .38 caliber revolver. He discharged a round into the floor. Then he seized 7 hostages. That group included an Augusta National chauffeur. It also included a special assistant to the President of the United States. Secret Service personnel evacuated Reagan from the course. They moved him in an armored limousine to the secure Eisenhower cabin. The crisis was escalating. Reagan had to get involved. The research states that Reagan contacted the gunman directly. He used a radio telephone patch into the pro shop. He said, "This is the President of the United States. This is Ronald Reagan. I understand you want to talk to me." Harris was frustrated by poor audio quality. He ripped the telephone receiver from the wall. The armed standoff lasted for 2 hours. Eventually, the hostages either escaped or were released. Law enforcement subdued Harris. There were no fatalities. Harris later pleaded guilty to kidnapping. He pleaded guilty to false imprisonment. He pleaded guilty to criminal damage to property. He received a 10-year prison sentence. That is an incredible story. A gunman breached one of the most exclusive properties in the world while the president was on the course. The Secret Service had to evacuate the leader of the free world, and the club managed to keep this story relatively quiet. Another somber event occurred on September 29, 1977. That was the day co-founder Clifford Roberts died. He did not die peacefully in his sleep. He took his own life on the grounds. Roberts was 83 years old. He was confronting advanced cancer. He had cardiovascular disease. He had suffered a debilitating stroke. He walked to the banks of Ike's Pond on the par 3 course. He was dressed in new pajamas. He carried his medical records. He also carried a brief note to his wife. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The research notes a tragic parallel. His mother had died in the same manner decades earlier. In keeping with the club's strict code of discretion, the club uses restrictive employee non-disclosure agreements. It uses unilateral short-term broadcast licensing. It uses federal trover litigation. It uses advanced agronomic manipulation. It uses extensive land acquisition. All of these tools help construct a self-contained reality. The pastoral landscape presented each spring masks a complex legacy. That legacy includes racial division. It includes labor marginalization. It includes broadcast censorship. It includes corporate statecraft. The club built an empire of beauty, and then it built a wall around that empire. The wall keeps out people who are not wanted. It keeps out words that are not allowed. It keeps out history that is inconvenient. The wall is made of contracts and lawsuits and legal threats. It is made of money and power and influence, and it has worked for nearly a century. The club controls what you see, what you hear, and what you know. They have spent decades perfecting this system. They have spent millions protecting it, and they will continue to protect it for as long as they can. The Masters will always be one of the most beautiful events in sports. The tradition is real. The champions are real. The course is a masterpiece. But the beauty exists alongside a history that Augusta has worked very hard to control. The club does not want you to know about the caddies who were displaced without pensions. They do not want you to know about the black golfers who were denied invitations for decades. They do not want you to know about the broadcasters who were banned for using the wrong words. They do not want you to know about the manufactured bird sounds or the subterranean tunnels or the armed standoff with the president. They want you to see the green grass and the white bunkers and the azaleas. They want you to believe that everything is perfect. It is not. Augusta National is a fortress built on control, and the dark secrets they have been hiding are not secrets anymore. The course remains stunning. The tournament remains a spectacle. But every time you watch the Masters now, you will know more than Augusta wants you to know. You will know about the man who built the system and the quote he left behind. You will know about the caddies who made champions and were then cast aside. You will know about the broadcasters who spoke out of turn and were silenced. You will know about the women who were denied membership for 80 years. You will know about the underground tunnels and the artificial bird sounds and the bought land and the lawsuits over jackets. You will see the beauty, but you will also see the control. That is the real story of Augusta National. That is the story they have been hiding, and now you know it. The next time you watch the Masters, listen closely to the birds. Look at the perfect grass. Watch the champions in their green jackets. And remember that none of it is as simple as it looks. There is a history behind every blade of grass and every word spoken on the broadcast. Augusta National has spent decades building its image. They have spent decades hiding their past. But the truth has a way of coming out. The dark secrets are no longer secret. They are here for everyone to see.